While the Yale New Haven report concluded that there had been no sexual abuse, the pediatrician who wrote the report never even met Dylan. The report was widely criticized, and State's Attorney Mako publicly announced that he gave it little weight and that the criminal investigation of Woody Allen would continue. On March 19, 1993, with only 2 hours' notice, Woody's custody trial began before Justice Elliott Wilk in New York State Supreme Court. He was represented by 6 different law firms led by a criminal attorney. In attempting to make the case that the children should be taken away from me, Woody took the stand as his own first witness. Early on, he and his attorneys tried to dismiss the issue of his affair with Suni. I didn't envision that I would maintain necessarily a long relationship with her, he testified, and I felt nobody in the world would have any idea about it except Suni and myself. At which point the judge asked dryly, "Wasn't that enough? That you would know that you were sleeping with your children's sister?" "No, I didn't see it that way," Woody replied. "She was an adopted child, and Dylan was an adopted child." He testified that my family was more like a foster home with kids from different parts of the world, that he didn't conceive of this as a sister relationship between the kids because a lot of kids were adopted and Suni was older. Woody talked about Satchel's negative attitude toward him and claimed that I was responsible for it. To demonstrate his point, he submitted a drawing that he swore under oath was made by Satchel. It was a drawing of a heart with 5 faces inside and names beneath them: Satchel, Dylan, Moses, Mommy, and Daddy, drawn with glasses. But under intense and wily cross-examination, Woody grew increasingly flustered. Then, in one of the most peculiar moments of the trial, he confessed that in fact he had drawn the entire picture himself. "You drew the heart?" asked my attorney, Eleanor Alter. "Yes," said Woody, "and put the faces of the family in it." Justice Wilk rose out of his chair to peer at the drawing Woody held. "You drew the faces of the family?" she asked again. "That's correct, and Satchel blackened my face out, and he drew a heart and drew a line through it and wrote no and crossed out my name." "So it wasn't accurate yesterday when you said that it was a drawing by Satchel?" "Well, some of it is," Woody insisted stubbornly. "I just drew it, and he crossed my face out." "But it was actually your drawing. This?" "Yes." In his redirect testimony the next morning, he returned to the subject of the drawing. "Satchel blackened out the face," he said. "I drew the heart, and inside the heart I put Satchel, Dylan, Moses, Mommy, and Daddy, because my practice was always to promulgate for Satchel some kind of warmth and respect for his mother and for Dylan and for Moses. And Satchel looked at the heart and then blackened my face out, eliminated it, blackened out the word Daddy, eliminated it, drew his own heart with a line through it, a forbidden line, and wrote the word no. He acknowledged that he had called the children little bastards, but never in the pejorative sense. I listened to him deny pushing Dylan's face into a plate of hot spaghetti, an incident witnessed by most of our family. He denied twisting Satchel's leg. He denied that he'd had sex with Suni while Dylan was in the apartment or at any time before the adoptions of Dylan and Moses. Asked whether he considered Moses, Dylan, and Satchel to be brothers and sister, he replied, "I think in a certain way they are brothers and sisters. It's not an easy question, not in the traditional sense, not in the way I am with my sister, no. They are not brothers and sisters. There's a difference between a biological brother and sister and adopted brothers and sisters." Then he concluded that Moses did consider Matthew his brother, and Satchel his brother, and Daisy, Lark, and Suni his sisters. He reluctantly admitted that Dylan's favorite person in the world, next to her mom, was her sister Lark. Further questioning revealed that he knew next to nothing about the lives of the children he sought custody of. He did not know their friends, their teachers, their doctors, or even the names of their pets. He had testified that there was a special arrangement for Moses's tuition. Under cross-examination, he admitted that the arrangement was that Miss Farrow pay for it. 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 Over his days on the stand, Woody became increasingly inarticulate. The New York Times observed that On his first day of testimony, he seemed relaxed, one arm draped over the back of his chair, giving answers that were lengthy, conversational, even funny. But yesterday he spoke quietly, sometimes mumbling, often asked that questions be repeated, and at times searched in vain for a way to phrase his answers. On the last day of his 3 days of testimony, the Times noted that Mr. Allen sat on the stand with the hunched-over posture of someone who half hoped to disappear by scrunching up into a small ball. He found it difficult to remember details and had to refer to printed transcripts, taking off his glasses and bringing his nose in contact with the paper, looking remarkably like a befuddled old man. Without respect for truth, he took the intimate moments of my pain and shock and horror and spun them into grotesque anecdotes for strangers. While I watched him talking on the witness stand, I thought I saw a strange thing. Like Clark Kent pulling apart his shirt, Woody opened his chest with his 2 hands, and inside, where a heart and soul and conscience ought to be, were entrails and dark things burrowing, unaccustomed to the light. Then his attorneys called me to the stand. According to the New York Times, Elkin Abramowitz, representing Mr. Allen in his custody suit against Mia Farrow, tried to portray her as a woman so wounded by Mr. Allen's affair with her adopted daughter that she would stop at nothing to strike back, a devious, manipulative woman whose thirst for vengeance had turned her into a howling fury. But someone slipped a different Ms. Farrow into the witness box. The woman who calmly answered Mr. Abramowitz's questions throughout a long, often tedious day looked like a Roman Catholic schoolgirl. The stricken look with which she recounted the demise of her relationship imposed a kind of respectful silence on the courtroom. Even the din of the construction work outside the building seemed to halt when Ms. Farrow described the cooling of Mr. Allen's affection. Woody brought forth his witnesses, a handful of employees, followed by shrink upon shrink upon shrink. Secure in their Freudian castles in a gray Jungian jungle, they streamed their jargon like television cult leaders who know their scriptures too well. While the press dozed, I wandered my own bleak terrain, and all the shrinks blurred into one fuzzy Babylonian ball. During the 6 weeks of testimony, not one of his witnesses testified that Woody Allen should be granted custody. None of the mental health professionals had ever dealt with a situation in which the children were forced to confront an ongoing sexual relationship between their father and their sister. One volunteered that, in these circumstances, we're flying by the seat of our pants. The judge informed us that the decision would be handed down in several weeks, one morning before 11 o'clock, so we shouldn't sit by the phone all day. Throughout the trial, my lawyer reassured me continually that Woody had no chance of obtaining custody, that he had not remotely succeeded in proving me an unfit mother, and that no judge would take 3 children away from their siblings to live with a father who was living with their sister. Editorials and countless letters of support from all over the country reinforced her assurances. Still, I never stopped worrying. If he were awarded custody, what would I do? I knew that if Moses, Dylan, and Satchel were forced to live with Woody Allen, it would destroy them. And what would happen to Tam and Isaiah? And what would then become of the other kids? Beyond that, I couldn't think. My lawyer said that Woody's suit was so outrageous that he would surely be ordered to pay my legal fees, estimated at well over $1 million, that I didn't have. But what if she was wrong? The younger kids had only the vaguest notion of why I had been going to court. I didn't want to worry them. As they went about their days, I got myself an agent, and luck came through with a movie to be filmed in Ireland that coming summer. I even started learning my lines. When I couldn't sleep, I went into the nursery to watch the children safe in slumber. Malignant specters of the dark nights moved into familiar positions. Hounds tugged on taut leather lines, howling horrible. While the children slept, I dreamt of Ireland awakening in gentle light, grey stone walls hemming the damp fields, sheep across the stretch of the Wicklow Mountains and the glowering hills of Connemara, apples in the branches near Inishtig, Oars dip the sea at Ballyhack. The blue-eyed daughters of Ballyknocken trudge to school. A shy new moon slipped into a starless sky. A cough stirred the dozy parrot. His beaky profile gave a one-eyed stare. My silver-haired son came wordlessly in small steps to lie beside me, blue veins beneath marble. I rose to rock the baby Isaiah. His eyes were drowsy opal seas. I cupped the metal curls and rocked him till his breath evened and the small fist fell from my shoulder. Then I laid him back in his crib and returned to my big bed to gather the white child in my arms. Him too I placed in the cot beside his brother, and both were asleep in the nursery light. These several things I did, and then I lay down to push back the scorched imprints of the long day. On the weekends we drove to Frog Hollow, and before 2 weeks had passed, I found myself watching the telephone in the mornings from 10 until 11. The older kids called me from their schools to see if there had been any word. Every day I reassured them that all would be well, that nothing would tear us apart. Our last shred of trust hung in the space between Justice Elliot Wilk and my family. On the morning of June 7th, the phone rang. I picked it up. My lawyer, Eleanor Alter, was in a phone booth at the courthouse. "We won," she said. "We won." I rushed over to her office, and there I sat down to read the lengthy judgment which addressed the many complicated issues that the custody trial had unearthed. In his state Supreme Court decision, Justice Wilk determined that Woody Allen. Mr. Allen had demonstrated no parental skills that would qualify him as an adequate custodian for Moses, Dylan, and Satchel. He showed no understanding that the bonds developed between adoptive brothers and sisters are no less worthy of respect and protection than those between biological siblings. Mr. Allen's deficiencies as a custodial parent are magnified by his affair with Suni. Having isolated Suni from her family, he left her with no visible support system. He had no consideration for the consequences to her, to Ms. Farrow, to the Previn children for whom he cared little, or to his own children for whom he professes love. Mr. Allen's response to Dylan's claim of sexual abuse was an attack upon Ms. Farrow, whose parenting ability and emotional stability he impugned without the support of any credible evidence. His trial strategy has been to separate his children from their brothers and sisters, to turn the children against their mother, to divide adopted children from biological children. His self-absorption, his lack of judgment, and his commitment to his divisive assault, thereby impeding the healing of the injuries he has already caused, warrant a careful monitoring of his future contact with the children. Mia Farrow. Few relationships and fewer families can easily bear the microscopic examination to which Ms. Farrow and her children have been subjected. It is evident that she loves children and has devoted a significant portion of her emotional and material wealth to their upbringing. She is sensitive to the needs of her children, respectful of their opinions, honest with them, and quick to address their problems. There is no credible evidence to support Mr. Allen's contention that Ms. Farrow coached Dylan or that Ms. Farrow acted upon a desire for revenge against him for seducing Suni. Mr. Allen's resort to the stereotypical woman-scorned defense is an injudicious attempt to divert attention from his failure to act as a responsible parent and adult. Ms. Farrow's refusal to permit Mr. Allen to visit with Dylan after August 4, 1992, was prudent. Her willingness to allow Satchel to have regular supervised visitation with Mr. Allen reflects her understanding of the propriety of balancing Satchel's need for contact with his father against the danger of Mr. Allen's lack of parental judgment. In a society where children are too often betrayed by adults who ignore or disbelieve their complaints of abuse, Ms. Farrow's determination to protect Dylan is commendable. Ironically, Ms. Farrow's principal shortcoming with respect to responsible parenting appears to have been her continued relationship with Mr. Allen.